Adam, thank you so much for joining me today. Really excited to have you on the show. Lots of crazy cool things that are happening. You know, in the last 2 years since you were first on the show, you were like our 5th or 6th guest when we first launched on
awesome,
Alberta
man.
Impact. So thank you so much for coming back. How are you, man? I mean, lots has happened in your personal life. Lots has happened in the business. Let's just talk. You just had a baby. Let's go personal first. How are you?
Great, man. Yeah, the kid is doing great. Our 4th one. So my wife and I are over the moon. We have now 2 sons and 2 daughters. So we got that nice blend and the balance. And we got this like young, crazy family. But it's man, it's so good. We're so lucky.
Right on. That's fantastic to hear. I'm glad to hear. And COVID's, I know COVID's been crazy for everybody. You've had some big growth with the organization with Bitcoin Well. Tell us a little bit about what business. How's business been going?
Good, man. Yeah, it's good. We've been Bitcoin Well is effectively trying to make it so that you can interact with Bitcoin in a way that is convenient to you. So it started with Bitcoin ATMs, right? Go and buy Bitcoin with cash, which is very popular. And I think lots of the success that we saw was because people needed that access to Bitcoin, immediate, fastest, and safest way to buy Bitcoin through a Bitcoin ATM. And now we've been able to take this success and kind of move it into this online ecosystem that allows people to like pay their bills in Bitcoin or sell their Bitcoin and receive like an Interac e-transfer to the bank or a direct deposit into their bank. And it's been so much fun to just be able to innovate in this already innovative space and see where the gaps are in this ecosystem, and then kind of build and bolster the power that is Bitcoin. Because really, you shouldn't need somebody else to use Bitcoin, but Bitcoin in and of itself, it can be a little bit complex and convoluted to use. And so we're kind of blending the security and the benefits of Bitcoin with the convenience of like modern banking, which is a nice blend.
That's awesome. Your passion is so great to see come through. Now, some big things happened since last we talked. You guys are now publicly traded.
Yes.
That's a huge move and very impressive for you guys. Take us through that process. How did that come to be, and how has that changed your direction and your flow?
Yeah, it was definitely a mission. I think that our business is quite simple. We sell Bitcoin. And we take in dollars and repeat. That's the business. And our money or our profit comes from charging a fee when somebody buys Bitcoin. With the ATMs especially, it's like a vending machine, right? You go up to the machine, you buy a bag of chips, and you walk away. The vending machine has revenue, they have a cost for the bag of chips, and then they have a profit. Our business is the exact same, but because it's Bitcoin, it was quite convoluted, quite complex. The lawyers didn't quite understand, the accountants didn't understand, the auditors didn't understand, the regulators didn't understand, the exchange didn't understand. And so it was a lot of educating, a lot of like talking about our business and finding ways that made sense for this new industry to kind of be brought into this traditional industry. And very, very happy it's over. It took a lot of time and energy to do that, and now we can get back to business building, which is obviously very, very exciting. But yeah, we are the world's first publicly traded Bitcoin ATM company that's now like translated into this all-encompassing kind of ecosystem for Bitcoin, and it's been a blast. I think that it's a nice way for people that like the space to gain exposure to the industry without direct short-term exposure to the price of Bitcoin. Because we make money based on transactions and not based on the price of Bitcoin. That's different than like the majority of the publicly traded Bitcoin industry is just price exposure, right? You have mining companies, price exposure. You have ETFs, price exposure. And then you have transactional businesses like us. And I think that we are unique in that if the Bitcoin price is $10,000 or $100,000, it doesn't really matter to us, because as long as people are transacting in Bitcoin, we're able to post revenues, and that's I think that's kind of the advantage to a transactional Bitcoin business.
How much has your mindset and focus changed since you first got into Bitcoin? Like when you first got into this, like when we first talked 2 years ago to 2.5 years ago, it was a fun thing for you. Talking to you now, your family's grown.
Yeah.
You have a much more serious and more intentful thought from what I can tell, just from our conversation of what Bitcoin is and potential power.
Oh yeah.
How has your thoughts changed?
Huge, man. I mean, like up until 5 years ago, really, maybe even 3 years ago, Bitcoin was this tool that I knew would give power to the individual. And I thought that was very good. And I had these like talking points that I could like run through, right? Like you look at like Napoleon's France, or you look at like these other like Venezuela and Cyprus and Greece, and you look at these like governments that had taken advantage of their economy and taken advantage of their citizens and what it did to the money, the savings in town. But I hadn't actually like experienced it firsthand. And now, over the last 3 to 5 years, I've experienced firsthand what it's like to like have bank accounts frozen. Like wife out for dinner, cards don't work because like, and then calling them and they're like, nope, you don't bank here anymore. Your account's frozen. Like I've experienced that firsthand. And then the country experienced it when our prime minister like froze those funds.
Yeah.
And so now it's like, it's so much more real and it's so much more plausible. Like in the back of my mind, and I always caveated like, every time I like talked about Bitcoin and talked about the power that it had, I prefaced it with, look, we're in Canada and we have a good financial system. We have a fine and a safe banking system. And I think if the last 6 months, and certainly the last 2 years have shown us anything, is that that's not true.
Yeah.
We don't have that anymore. And I think that like now, like Bitcoin was cool and fun. You make some bets with football and buy a Tesla and some sneakers and da-da-da-da. But now it's like, whoa, this is actually pretty important. This is like something that can change the world. We need to give like the people their money back because right now they don't have any access to their money.
Control.
It's all about the control, and like everything's convenient, right? Like you tap your phone, you know you're sending an Interac e-transfer, like whatever. It's all super convenient. Pay your bills online. It's all awesome, but you're exposed to like one person in that big chain not liking you. It just goes away. And then what do you do? Like you can't buy a house with cash. You can't buy a car with cash. You can't pay your taxes in cash. So you can't pay your taxes in legal tender. But the private businesses that you can pay your taxes through have the ability to choose who can and can't do business with them. It's like, it's so broken and so backwards. And I've experienced this like the government's been calling me and like, hey, you got to pay your taxes. And I'm like, well, I can't. I don't have a bank account. Like, how do you want me to pay my taxes? Like, you got to figure that out. You got to go to the bank. It's like, I've been to the bank. They don't want me to, they won't give me a bank account. So how do I pay taxes? And it's like this, it's always somebody else's problem in the chain, but the banks don't like me, and so I'm gone. And then the banks don't like the truckers, and so they're gone. And the banks don't like the donators, and so they're gone. And it's like, well, who aren't they going to like next? Is it independent media? Like, probably, right? In some capacity.
Well, they're the only ones that can speak out against them.
Totally.
But they can be bullied because they're small.
Absolutely. Yeah. Just like countries. So yeah,
this is almost like you know, I don't want to be an alarmist or anything like that, but it's almost like a revolution that Bitcoin is kind of bringing to the forefront, you know, from a much more strategic, more beneficial, you know, it's not a destructive revolution, but it's almost like a revolution. And we talk about this. I mean, we talked with Jeff Booth a few weeks ago, and, you know, he didn't necessarily use the word revolution, but it was almost like tiptoeing around that word just to be like, this is a revolution. It's a revolution of the entire economic and financial system that needs to happen.
Yeah, I would say so. I think that, revolution is a strong word, and usually one that PR teams don't like very much.
Very much, exactly. Yeah.
But I do think that when we look back on like the advent of Bitcoin in 2008, and then the kind of adoption over the last, you know, nearly a decade and a half now, it will be looked at as one of the most important like inventions since the internet, maybe even greater than the internet. Like the internet changed the way we communicate, changed the way we consume information. It changed communication tactics as a whole. Bitcoin is doing that same thing, but to financial industries. And I think that, like, frankly, communication for a large part is more important than money. Like, even people who don't have money need to be able to communicate freely, and I absolutely believe that. But the self-custody of money is like equally as important. Like it's like 1 and 1A.
Yeah.
Just equally as important. And I think that it's a slower adoption because no one was opposed to the internet. It wasn't like the post offices weren't like, no, the internet will ruin your life. It's like, no, it's just clearly better that if I can pick up a device and talk to somebody, it's just going to be better.
Yeah.
But people are opposed to Bitcoin because they know it makes banks, it makes, you know, governments for a large part obsolete.
Yeah.
And much like, you know, taxi drivers are against Uber,
Well, changing of the norm when you've done something one way for so long, to change out of that routine, it can be painful for a lot of people, right?
Absolutely it
Yeah,
can.
yeah.
And it is. I think it is painful for a lot of people.
But we're like generations now see change happening so fast that I think it's becoming a lot less painful for those younger generations. I mean, like the technology that they're coming. I mean, look at the advent of Facebook, Twitter, you know, Instagram. These are all these different changing ways of communicating. You're talking the internet and what that's opened up. This is a big one, obviously, because it's like, you know, hundreds and hundreds of years old. This financial institute that we've developed, and you know, changing from fur for tobacco to a finance, you know,
Totally.
to actual tangible money that's measured against something. That's a big change. It's going to be painful, but the younger generations, do you feel like they're more open to it now? I mean, I feel like Bitcoin, maybe it's just because my focus has changed in the last like 6 months, but I feel like Bitcoin has just exploded in the last little while. People are being more open to exploring it. They're putting more finances into it, or they're putting more investment into it. The technologies are opening up, and we're even looking at governments taking it on. We've had Minister Doug Schweitzer on the show here recently, and he's pushed for developing the technologies for handling Bitcoin and wanting to be a leader in that space as Albertans. Do you see that change happening? Like, are we going in the right direction to? I mean, I don't want to say Bitcoin. It's bold of me to say Bitcoin is the new future, but there's a really good argument for it. Like, I mean, you've given a really good argument for it in the last 5 minutes.
Yeah. I don't think it's bold. I think it's like Bitcoin is the future. Even with all the other cryptos that exist, like Bitcoin is the only truly decentralized with a known scarcity that exists.
Gives it its value.
Gives it its value. It's like scarcity is the only thing that drives value.
Yes.
And the only reason scarcity drives value is because our time is scarce. You think about like anything, like money. Money at the root is simply a vehicle to put your time, right? You want the time that we have right now. You got a daughter. You have any other kids?
No.
You got the daughter. I got a pile of kids. It's like, like, what do you want to be doing at 9 o'clock on a Monday morning, right? Do you want to be like playing baseball or wrestling or doing whatever, or do you want to be like talking to some nut talking about Bitcoin? It's like, well, you know, the nut talking about Bitcoin's fine, but like, you know, you want to hang out with your family, and that's where you want to be. And so the reason you're working today is so that you can have that time with your daughter, with your family in the future. But you can't in the future if the money, if there's no vehicle to move your time back and forth. And so we work like dogs today to save a bunch of money or save a bunch of time through money and move it over like into the future, right? We want to move our time into the future so that you're working 15 hours a day now, and then you work 12, and then you work 10, and then you work 8, and then you work 6, and then you work 0, right? Over a period of time, because you've stockpiled all this like this time. And so when you have something that is constantly printed, not scarce, that is only useful within geographical borders, like the Canadian dollar or the Russian ruble or the US dollar even to an extent, and you realize that like that's not a very good thing to have your time stored in. And so you have to look outside. You have to gamble in like the fiat market. Like you have to buy stocks. You have to invest in certain things where, again, you're exposed to the decisions on one or a small group of people. And again, you're exposed to having your time in a spot that doesn't move across into the future very well.
Yes.
So you have to look for like different commodities, right? Like things that are scarce and things that can't be manipulated by one or a small group of people. And Bitcoin is the one that fits the bill for that without question. It's like the most obvious thing, the most obvious tool to have your time stored in, because we know that there will only ever be less Bitcoin available. Think about that. There will only ever be less Bitcoin available, which is like mind-blowing. That's something that I don't think hits many people like it should. That is not true of really anything except for time, which is crazy. That's crazy.
It would make people a lot more accountable, more responsible.
more responsible, but even just have like longer. Have you like dove into the concept of time preference? Time preference is like this idea of, do you want $100 today or $101 next week? It's like, well, you'll probably take $100 today because there's risk in waiting until next week, right? What if I die? What if I disappear? What if I'm lying? Like $100 before I leave this room or 101 next week. You're like, oh, I'll take the $100. What if I said $100 today or $200 next week? It's like, well, double. Like, that's pretty good. And then think about $1 million today or 20 million next week. It's like, oof. I'll probably wait the week. I'll take the 20 million next week.
There's a price at some point.
There's a price. Then the price of time is the price of tomorrow, as Jeff would put it, is right there. But then we don't have that same time preference with our current financial system because the money we have sucks. So that's why we have this debt culture where it's like, you want that car today, or you want to save up for the car and buy it in 3 years. Yeah. It's like, well, how am I going to save up? Right? I'm going to gamble in the stock market. I'm going to gamble with investments, or I'm going to save money that actually doesn't hold any value. Like a car today is so much more expensive than it was 5 years ago. Yeah. So if you're saving up to buy a car, you're screwed. And so you take on a pile of debt and you get it. And it feels good. And then it's like, do you want a phone right now? Or you want to save up for 2 years to buy that phone, and so it kind of continues. Yeah. And as a society, we have this really, really, really low, or high, I guess, high time preference, which is not very good. It's not good for anything. It's consumeristic.
It's short-sighted.
It's super short-sighted.
We're looking at this crazy long distance. I'm going to retire when I'm 50 and yada. But that, just the way you've explained it, that's short-sighted.
Yeah.
Because of the method we're looking at to get us to that time.
Yeah, and we have an exuberant amount of false trust in the system that's going to get us there, which I don't think is fair. Like, I don't think that we've done enough critical thinking behind, like, is this guy in a suit that went to school for 6 months really the guy that's going to take my retirement to the next level? Like, and is that what I want, retirement? Or do you want to leave, like, generational wealth for your kids? And how do you do that? It's like, is it by giving them a pocket of GICs? Obviously not, right?
Yeah.
It's by having assets that are not manipulated by anyone, but certainly not central parties in power. And it's by having the ability to pass that down without any repercussions, which doesn't exist. Like, we're already talking about, like, this house is not going to go to your kids tax-free, regardless of value. All this equipment is not going anywhere tax-free, right? Yeah. You have to sell it and
it's already had tax put on it.
Oh, of course.
And that's such a crazy concept that people seem to forget, is like, just the tax system. We won't go down that road. Let's talk about the acceptance. So I mean, we've got like this is why Bitcoin should be there, why it's there, what its potential can be. Now let's talk about accepting it. So this year's Super Bowl, I mean, the amount of Bitcoin, I think it was like, I can't remember, it was like 60% of commercials were revolving around cryptocurrency and Bitcoin, right?
Yeah.
But there's this acceptance. So you've talked already about, like, well, you can't get a bank account. So now you have to find people that dabble in Bitcoin that will give you the services that you need in exchange for that Bitcoin. And the technology needs to be there. And that's something you've heavily invested in as well, which is the ATMs, the Bitcoin ATMs.
Yeah.
The more people are accepting it, I love this one. You did the deal with Unified.
Yeah.
Where the fighters can now accept all of or some of their their winning purses in Bitcoin. Super cool. Now, they need to be able to use that somewhere to get groceries, to buy milk and food and gas and all of these things, right? Elon Musk dabbled in it with Tesla, with purchasing the car with it. Now, how do you put energy in that car with Bitcoin? So let's just talk about the technologies and where we need to go now. Because I feel like, I'll say one more example, actually. China has really talked about, and like there's some real push that they're going to be having their own currency, and they're developing the technologies for it to be utilized within their system. Now, how does the rest of the world buy from China or sell to China if their technology is proprietary to them?
Yeah. Yeah, they're talking about, on the last comment there, you're talking about CBDCs, central bank digital currencies, which are like terrible for the world. I don't think CBDCs will do any benefit to anyone because the root foundation of the money is still problematic. But as far as the acceptance piece goes, I think it happens in stages. And shameless plug, like what we do at Bitcoin Well is that's exactly what we're trying to do, is make Bitcoin like easier to access and easier to use. That's like our core foundation. And so right now we are in the phase of like just accumulation. It's an accumulation game by far and wide. That's exactly what, as a consumer, you want to be doing, is as much Bitcoin as possible. But if you're 100% all into Bitcoin, you need to be able to live and buy groceries and gas and things. And so, the way to do that initially is by using the existing like fiat rails, the Visa, MasterCard, et cetera, rails that currently exist, and then put Bitcoin on top of that. So right now, like at our website right now, you can pay virtually any bill with Bitcoin. So you got a power bill, like your Epcor bill, a couple $1,000 a month or a couple $100 a month, whatever it is. You can just type in your account number. It generates a QR code, tells you how much Bitcoin to send. You send the Bitcoin, boom, bill is paid. Same is true of like Visa, MasterCard, Amex, like any major credit card. You can pay that with Bitcoin, which I think is like, if you're all into Bitcoin, but you have this fiat coupon that you can go and use at a coffee shop or at the farmer's market or wherever, then you're able to do that. So our focus right now is like accumulation, and that was through the ATMs. Fastest and safest way to buy Bitcoin was through the Bitcoin ATM. Now we're like kind of transitioning to this like online ecosystem that allows users to interact with Bitcoin, because that's, I think, the most important thing is like, you have all this money and that's great. You have all this Bitcoin, that's great. But what do you want to do with it? You want to be able to like take your daughter to a movie. You want to be able to like, go on a trip with your family, whatever it might be. And so I think it's like tying that gap together. Not just in Canada. You have to be able to go so far outside of Canada if you want to. Like, what if you want to go to Ireland? What if you want to go to Mexico? What if you want to go to Texas? Like, you got to be able to spend that money virtually anywhere. And that's where our big focus is on this ecosystem that looks and feels like a bank, but that gives you full ownership and self-custody of your money, which I use money in Bitcoin more interchangeably than I use like fiat or Canadian dollars and money interchangeably. So that's, I think, like the first phase. But then the next phase, which is so exciting to me, companies that only buy or allow you to buy Bitcoin will be dead. Because you won't need to buy Bitcoin. If we do our jobs properly, over the next 2-3 decades, you won't need to buy Bitcoin, because it will be like,
it'll be out and
it'll be your money. It'll just be how you are able to interact. Like, how often are you like, you get paid every week or every couple of weeks or whatever, and you're like, I just bought myself some Canadian dollars. It's like not what you did, right? You traded your time for Canadian dollars, and then you spend those Canadian dollars. And like what we're trying to do with things like the Bitcoin savings plan, like what you saw with Unified, is allowing people to just trade their time for Bitcoin as part of that accumulation. But because they're all in, they then have to use their Bitcoin in order to
and they're putting it back out there
and back into circulation.
Exactly.
And then so like right now, what's happening is we're the facilitator of that, right? So you got your Epcor pill, for example. Bitcoin comes to us. We trade that into Canadian dollars, and we send the dollars to Epcor. That's how that kind of string works. But eventually, we should be able to send it directly to Epcor. There should be that middle kind of period in the place, and then someone else is facilitating, or like we do this too, I guess, but like facilitate the distribution of Bitcoin to the Epcor employees, because they're the ones that have opted in to have Bitcoin as part of their paycheck or instead of a paycheck, and so on and so forth. And so I think that we're in phase 1 right now. And phase 2, like I said, like I really, really hope that nobody even considers buying Bitcoin in 3 decades, because they will just have it. Like, it won't be something to buy.
Part of their lives.
Be part of their lives.
Right.
And it won't be a thing that you invest in. It'll be savings. It'll be your root savings account.
Yeah.
And it will have proven over, at that point, 4 or 5 decades, that it is the strongest form of savings on planet Earth. And I think that as we kind of like transition into that period, and over the next kind of decade or two into that period, there's gonna be bumps and bruises along the way, and people are gonna have like a learning curve, but not unlike we had learning curves with the internet where it was kind of like the internet was a scary place back in the day, right? We just didn't really realize it because it wasn't money. It was like, my email address got hacked. Oh well, like that's
Shut
a
it
funny
down
thing.
and start a new one, right? Like just
It's like instead of like Alberta Oil Boy 1 at hotmail.com, I'm Alberta Oil Boy 2 at hotmail.com. No problem. But that's not the same with money because you're actually losing tangible things.
Yes.
And then
like you said, time. You're losing
losing your time. You're losing this thing that you worked hard for and over time. And then, you know, I think, like I said, there will be bumps and bruises, but I do think that in the next few decades, Bitcoin will be a part of everyday life, and Bitcoin will be a part of how people interact with money. Because it will be their root savings account.
So what happens to the banks then? So, you know, like if you got your mortgage and we want to move my mortgage over to being paid by Bitcoin, what happens to the banks? What happens to these systems that are put into place now?
Yeah, so the bank's profit model right now isn't the like $8 a month you pay for your account, right? It's borrowing your money and renting it to somebody else,
right? Yeah,
for your mortgage.
Yes,
and it's like they take money from person A, send it to person B, and that's how they make their profit on that. It's through custody, and in a world where custody of funds no longer exists, this is good for the consumer because the banks will probably always exist. In some capacity or another, at some place in the world or another, but they'll have to provide extreme value for you to want to leave your money with them because it will be more dangerous than holding it yourself.
Right.
And it should be frowned upon. Like it should only be for things like what you said, like a mortgage and things. But notably, there's no reason why you couldn't do that with Bitcoin too. Like Bitcoin is an asset that you can borrow against, which is the best way to borrow. It's like the same concept as a mortgage because a house presumably is an appreciating asset. So you borrow against it to buy it, and then in 30 years when it's paid off, it's paid for itself. You've had a place to live, and it's higher in value than what you bought it for. And the same kind of concept can be true of Bitcoin, but in the reverse, where you have this Bitcoin, you borrow against that Bitcoin to buy things that are depreciating assets, which would be like why are you borrowing money to have a car?
Yes.
That's like the worst thing you can possibly do because like, and like I've done it, I do it. We know it's not that smart, but we do it because it's like time preference, right? It's the world that we live in. But the fact that we even consider doing that is pretty silly because you borrow this money and you pay all this money for this thing that will be worth a lot less in the future. Same is true of like iPhones and computers.
Any technology for sure.
Yeah, virtually like anything that you use is that way. And so what we should be doing instead is borrowing against appreciating assets and then buying the things that depreciate. And I think that tools like that are available. Now, the problem with that is custody. So you have to be willing to give up your money. You hold long-term exposure to the asset, which is Bitcoin, but you give up that control piece. Like if let's say you've got a loan against Bitcoin, a $50,000 loan against Bitcoin, you no longer have the flexibility to just up and go, right? You have to, somebody else has custody. You own it, but somebody else has custody, and therefore somebody else has control over that money, which is just the trade-off, right?
Yeah.
Just the trade-off.
Yeah. What about so we were talking about how limited Bitcoin is like that's what makes it its value. You got organizations like Hut 8, up in Lethbridge area there that are mining for that. And I'm sure these are all over the world. I haven't done a lot of research. I've been mostly focusing on Alberta itself, but I mean, we are a pretty big leader right now in the world when it comes to Bitcoin. When we've got places like Hut 8, we've got a government that's looking to explore this more and develop these technologies. I had mentioned earlier about Doug Schweitzer, making that announcement that he wants to be a leader. He wants Alberta to be a leader in that. What does that mean for Albertans and for you going into the world market, knowing that you're backed by your government, by your governing body?
Yeah, hopefully a lot less red tape.
Yes.
Hopefully a lot less scrutiny of the industry, and hopefully a lot more opportunities within the industry here. Bitcoin is quite easy to understand, and it doesn't actually take a lot of technical expertise to, there's a bit of learning, obviously. There's a learning curve.
Yeah.
But you don't necessarily need like this incredible amount of education to be able to use it, which is like pretty poetic by design, because it means that the government can't actually do much to help or to support that ecosystem. What they can do is not do the practices that they're used to, which is like red tape, blockade. And I think that Alberta's done a pretty good job of that. I think that even in Canada as a whole, like FinTrack, the money regulation body, the money regulator in Canada, has done a really good job of making sure that the rules and regulations aren't too strict, right? To kind of cripple the industry. We saw the UK, like the UK regulators did a horrible job trying to regulate the industry, and they just basically wiped the industry out. So if you want Bitcoin, you literally can't be in the UK. It's very, very difficult to have Bitcoin. And there's certain things that is happening right now that makes Bitcoin more difficult to acquire. But at the end of the day, government's going to do what the government's going to do. And I think that Alberta, for all intents and purposes, has done a pretty good job of staying out of the way and letting the industry grow and mature and really become this. I truly believe that the Bitcoin industry can be like a juggernaut for Alberta specifically, and because we have like rich power resources here, because we have bright technology minds that exist here, and because we have a lot of like entrepreneurial thinking here, it's like the trifecta to be able to. A lot people have those independently, or other provinces have those independently, other countries have those independently, but not like we do here in Alberta. We have this trifecta, and it's largely because of the oil and because of the power that we have. We have the ability to really, really, really blow the top off of what this industry can be. And I think the government's seemingly committed to wanting to do that.
Yeah.
And that's pretty exciting.
That's awesome.
Yeah, it's cool.
Is there anything that you specifically want to have happen or want to see happen, that needs to happen soon or now that would help things move along a little bit more quicker or a little bit more efficiently?
Yeah, I think like I saw an article, the CBC did a pretty good article about like what Minister Schweitzer had said, and pretty recently, and they called this industry like maverick, and they called it the Wild West or something like that. And frankly, I think that's wrong. I think that banks are horribly underregulated, and they have like an exuberant amount of control that makes it difficult for us to innovate. You walk into TD, like, and I'll give you a great example. And TD is like, this is a real live example. If you have a TD Visa debit card that you want to buy Bitcoin with, TD will block that transaction. Yep. If it's $100, if it's $200, if it's $1,000, TD has made the decision that you can't. Now, take that into cigarettes, take it into gasoline, take it into tobacco or into alcohol. Take it into an ATM at a casino. Imagine if your bank blocked a transaction that you, like, verifiably and knowingly wanted to make. It would be blood in the streets, right? It would be absolutely like chaotic if consumers weren't able to spend the money how they wanted to spend it. But TD has taken the position that Bitcoin is bad, and they do not want their customers, their clients, spending their money on Bitcoin. And I think that's a problem. And I think it's problematic that like banks just have that control. Banks have that power. That in and of itself is a huge problem. And I think the banks need to answer that. I think that like if we're going to stop people from spending money on things that could potentially harm them, which frankly Bitcoin can't. Like there's an argument that the crypto casino industry as a whole, this like random. I think very poorly about the majority of cryptocurrency because they're mostly just centralized casino tokens. There's an argument for that, and that's fine. But like, let's take a pretty serious look at health too. Like, why is fast food, allowed? How come you can go and buy a carton of Du Maurier cigarettes, but you can't buy Bitcoin? You can't logically invest in your future of your financial look? Like, how come you can go to a bar and drink yourself to death, but you can't buy $100 worth of Bitcoin? Like. And who made it okay for them to say that? Like, Bitcoin is legal, right? And assuming they're interacting with a legal platform, which, we are, for example, why? Who has made it okay for them to do that?
Yeah.
And that's the Wild West. That's like an unregulated industry that has no checks and balances and should be very terrifying for the majority of people. I have hurt feelings because the bank has not treated me very well for the last decade. But it's that I think is what the government can do better is just keeping the existing financial system in check,
keeping honesty going,
and making sure that like we don't kind of like cut this incredible technology off at the foot,
right?
Because of preservation. Like, do not confuse this with anything. TD doesn't want Bitcoin not to protect its citizens, but because it sees Bitcoin as a threat.
Yes.
Hard stop, like
Gotcha.
Without question. And the fact that they have the power to do something about threats is problematic, in my opinion.
Yeah, yeah. Well, yeah, especially when you just said, it's taking into account, or it's putting at risk the general good of society,
yeah,
the general potential growth of society. If that self-preservation is putting everything else at risk, that's a scary thought.
It is. Now, there's an opportunity here for the free market to fix itself.
Yeah.
And that's by, TD consumers realizing this. And our messaging is actually quite funny. Do you remember the old Bell commercials where they said like, it's not you, it's your network? Remember those?
Yes, I do.
So we have a similar error where if it's the bank blocking the transaction for no good reason, our error screen says it's not you, it's your bank. And we educate the customer because the customer has no idea.
Yeah.
And we educate the customer saying like, hey, your bank won't allow this transaction to go through because it's a Bitcoin transaction. Now they have a choice. They can stay with their bank because it's the easiest thing to do.
Yeah.
Or they can leave. And if enough people leave, TD will have to like walk that policy back, or they will die. And I think that's a good thing. That's like the free market working, and that's like pretty positive. So they can waltz down the street and go to some other bank that's got that allows, or at least is open to Bitcoin, people buying Bitcoin on their platform, and that would be solid. So there is an opportunity for the free market to work here. It's like tough in this hybrid market. Yeah,
I mean,
absolutely.
by walking those policies back and working with Bitcoin and this evolution, they can coexist and save face and continue to exist in a more adapted form and hopefully a more positive form.
As long as their profit incentives change.
Right.
Because their profit incentive is only strictly about the custody of money, which is the most dangerous thing for money to be. So it's kind of like, we're seeing this, and you know this better than anyone probably, like this independent media push and surge. It works because you're dedicated to the truth, right? You want like, a variety of opinions. You want a variety of individuals to come on the show and speak and entertain and inform, right? Those are the two pieces that you want.
Hang on.
But like these legacy kind of conglomerate media companies don't super care about that. They need this like clickbait, eyeball view attention in order to pay the bills.
Yeah.
You, I'm assuming, make more money if your people or if your audience watches for 4 hours compared to 1 hour. That's not true of like media conglomerates, right? They only need 7 seconds of commercials and then off they go.
Yeah.
And so there's a bit of a negative incentive that exists there because they're not. And I'm probably going to stop there, and I'm not going to dive into like all my thoughts there. But I do think that
that's another show.
That's another show. The profit incentive for banks has to change away from we take control of your money and then do something with it, and into we provide you the best value so that you want to pay us to use our services.
Right.
That's how it should be, in my opinion.
Well, I think the more educated generations that are coming up, they're understanding that. They're seeing that. I mean, your analogy on time for money is, I mean, that's an age-old analogy, but we consistently, you said we have short-term memories sometimes.
Yeah.
We consistently need to be reminded of that analogy. And I see this post all the time on some of the feeds that I follow where it's, work, go to work, pay bills, go to sleep, get up, go to work, pay bills, go to sleep, right? For 50 years till you're 70, 75 and get 11 years of freedom.
Yeah.
That doesn't seem fair now, does it, right?
No, not at all.
We see that all the time. And it's funny how we forget about that reality. And I like where this potential future is that Bitcoin is offering. It takes us out of that.
Yeah, man. People forget, and I think people too, they like place blame inappropriately.
Yes.
They think they need more money. What they don't realize is that the more you get of something, the less valuable that something becomes.
We're seeing that in the economy right now.
It's
with
evident.
inflation.
Yeah.
There's so much money out there, but everything just went up in price.
So who has more money? Like who is actually going to be prosperous in 5 years?
Yeah.
Where houses are through the roof, cars are through the roof, you know, property taxes, gas, everything has gone up in apples. Like you don't go to the grocery store without dropping $50 anymore. And that's before you even buy any meat.
Yeah.
So I don't think that anybody, like, there's some short-term windows where it's like, whoo, you know, look at me, I'm doing well, I can afford all these things. But eventually the prices, so you don't actually need more money. You need different money. You need better money. I mean, to steal another one from Jeff Booth, like fix the money, fix the world, right?
Exactly.
And we have broken money.
Yeah.
Right now, Canada has broken money. And Bitcoin offers a solution to that. And I think that you're right. The younger generation is going to pick that up a lot faster. But I think it's very, very important for everyone to at least have a decent argument against Bitcoin. And I'm not talking like these you know what FUD is, like fear, uncertainty, and doubt. I'm not talking about this like this FUD that it's like bad for the environment and like all these, because those arguments are so poorly thought out. They don't they don't actually like they don't stand any weight more than like 60 seconds if you actually think about them logically. I'm talking like actually give me a reason why a scarce, fungible, geographically like inclusive money supply is not better than what we currently have today. And you can't. It's like it's impossible to do that. And I've had this conversation with multiple people, and they get all, you know, they're all upset about certain aspects of Bitcoin without kind of seeing the whole picture. And when you draw the whole picture, it makes a lot of sense. Yeah. There's room for improvements, I'm sure, in the way the ecosystems interact. But in a pure Bitcoin standard society, the collective is healthier. And I think that's what we all want. Everyone wants the collective to be healthier. And in a Bitcoin standard society, you have a healthier collective versus this like fiat manipulated society that we have right now where the collective is weak. Yeah. And it's not in a good way.
Yeah. I love how you said geographically inclusive. That's another major point of cryptocurrency's advantage in the world is just it's inclusive everywhere. You can take that Bitcoin from here. You can go to Russia. You can go to maybe not Russia. It's just the only thing that's in my mind. So it's the place I go. But like, you know, you can go to Ireland. You can go to England, and it can be accepted. Yeah. As long as their technology is there to accept it and it's recognized, I guess.
Yeah, but even like the point of Bitcoin is that you can access it anywhere as long as you have an internet connection. And that's special. Yeah. I don't think that's true of anything. And it's because it's decentralized, right? Because like the root Bitcoin protocol is so decentralized that as long as you have access to the internet, you're in good shape. You don't need anyone's permission. Not even Putin can take away that permission from you, which is like, wow, right? Like you're interacting directly with an internet protocol that gives you access to money. Which is like, we've never had that before, right? Even our internet for communications, we rely on centralized parties. Like we rely on Google's IP address. We rely on Twitter's IP address or Facebook's or your grandma's IP address. We rely on centralized authority, centralized parties to give us the communication tools that is the internet. However, if we could interact with the internet directly, which you can through an HTTP protocol, but you can't access somebody else's information. And that's where the kind of the barrier is. Like right now, when you go on the internet, you go on Google, you're like accessing Google's information. And if somebody cuts off that source, then you have no, you can still access information, but it's the only information that you have, which makes it less useful. But with money, that's what you want. You don't want somebody else's money, you want your money. And so because you can access your own money anywhere in the world, it's infinitely more valuable, right? You're a lot less susceptible to one government's poor actions or poor response to something, and you have you have more options throughout the world to be able to go and interact with your money the way that you actually need to and want to interact.
So awesome. Adam, this was great. We didn't even really start the episode.
Hey, man.
We kind of just hammered through it. Things were going so good, which was so awesome and so refreshing because it was very raw and just very just honest. And like, you know, you said that's what we're looking for. We're looking for just the honest opinions and the honest thoughts and the truth about how this thing works. What you guys are doing over there is absolutely wicked. I think it's revolutionary. I think it's new. It's fresh. It's what the world needs. All of your statements you've said are great arguments for it. To not even arguments, it's just fact.
Yeah.
And that's what we want. We want the fact of the matter is this is how this works. This is what it can do. You welcome anybody to come and argue it with you because
I love it, man.
There's as long as it's factual.
Yeah.
Like a factual argument is what we need on the subject, and open minds. We need more open minds to this because it is world changing. You know, you quoted Jeff Booth. It is world changing. Change the money system, change the world. And there's lots of really cool organizations. There's so much more we can get into. I mean, Mark Carruthers with the Glen Rose Rehabilitation Hospital, they're accepting Bitcoin as a donation option. This is huge. More and more organizations are starting to open up to paying employees with Bitcoin as an option, or at least a percentage of, to help, you know, ease that transition.
That's like, so we have a program called the Bitcoin Savings Plan.
Yeah.
And we offer that to employers to allow their employees to take a portion of their paycheck in Bitcoin. And I think we're like nearing the 500 employees mark.
Wow.
Of people that are like either like said they're interested or have signed up into that program, which is like, that's a lot. Like we've only been hitting this. This has been really in concept for a lot of time, but only in the world for not that long. And we're seeing traction. We're seeing people, and that's how you should buy Bitcoin. You should buy Bitcoin. 5% of your paycheck for the rest of your life should go into Bitcoin. And holy smokes, will you be financially sovereign at that point? And I think that's like, it's amazing. Yeah.
I've talked to some investment guys, and a lot of guys are not against Bitcoin. They're like you just said, take 5%.
Yeah.
Make it 4, 5, 10% of your portfolio and go into it. Do it. It's not a bad move. And that's good to hear. That's great to hear that, again, there's more open minds out there to this.
In my opinion, 2.1% of your net worth should be in Bitcoin.
Gotcha.
Take your net worth, what is today, March something, 2022. Your net worth, you got a house, you got a business, you got savings, you got life insurance policy, you got RSP and whatever. Take that, 2.1% of that into Bitcoin.
Yeah.
And next 10, 20 years, you'll be laughing.
And the adoption will just make it that much more easy to transition into making it part of your life.
Absolutely.
On a consistent basis.
Absolutely.
Awesome. Adam, thank you so much for coming in and talking to us about this. This was awesome, like super educational. Again, like I said, there's so much more that we could have got into. I think we need to have you back because
we should find someone who's like anti-Bitcoin and let's sit
down and just like let's go after it.
I think
that'd be awesome. I think that would be fantastic. We should maybe get a TD rep in here and see where that conversation goes.
I don't think they're allowed in the same room as me anymore.
Thank you again. This was fantastic, and all the best to you. You know, I'm going to encourage people to go and check out Bitcoin Well, what you guys are doing. There's, like I said, there's other things that you guys are involved in, and it's really educational. It's good to learn and know more about this. Don't be ignorant, and learn about this because this is some important stuff.
Absolutely. Thanks, man.
Ron, thank you.
Thanks for having me.
You betcha.